Today's topic is one that I am undoubtedly very excited about, even though my tone is going to be abnormally firm, I guess a little tense because of how much I believe in what I'm getting ready to share. This has to do with how, as I was reflecting on my past, especially my past as a student, it dawned on me that this country is described as having issues with things like reading comprehension, and how writing is another aspect of our education that needs improvement. Because of course, how can you expect for children to be able to write if they're not able to even read? But you know that reading is something that you could consider easily at a basic level something achievable. Like, you can be literate enough to be able to recognize words, letters, and symbols, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you comprehend its meaning. Something that surprises me is that some people find it difficult to believe that an individual can read and recognize letters and words, but not necessarily grasp the meaning of what's on a page. And here, I'm going to describe another thing that I think is a problem that nobody talks about. And by nobody talks about, I mean that in my career in school, I never heard it. In my entire time when I was in school, I never heard it. Only one individual I asked today said that when they went to college, they heard a little bit of what I illustrated to them, because I asked 3 people about this topic and I described to them very quickly what it is that I mean. One of them said that when they were in college, that's when they experienced a little bit of what I'm getting ready to express. So you guys with college degrees, let me know if you got to benefit from what I'm getting ready to describe. And if you did, how was it presented to you? Something I have never ever heard any teacher mention, let alone reinforce as a skill, is spoken comprehension. Now, you guys right now, the audience, are listening to me. I am the messenger. I am the one delivering a speech to you. Pretend for a moment that I am a book that you are reading, but the book is actually reading to you, is reading itself to you. That's how I want you to perceive me as a messenger at this moment. It's not going to be as well structured as a book, because with a book, you're able to look at what you have written. But when I'm speaking something, it's not like I can illustrate to you with a source material what I'm expressing, where what I'm expressing comes from. So it's possible that I'm going to have to jump back and forth between points to be able to express myself clearly on this one. So just to give you a heads up, if you hear myself repeating myself, I'm doing that on purpose. All the memories I have about teachers reinforcing skills have to do with reading comprehension and writing efficiently. Listening skills were mentioned, but it wasn't really fleshed out. Listening skills was mostly presented as make sure that you're paying attention so that you don't miss what the material is, what the content is. But nobody ever really fleshed it out from the perspective of, you're getting ready to listen to this program, you're getting ready to listen to this documentary, you're getting ready to listen to this speech, you're getting ready to listen to this administrator talk, you're getting ready to listen to this student speak, you're getting ready to listen to your parents speak, to your teacher speak, whoever it is who is delivering a speech. Nobody ever broke down how to listen to someone actively and intently. And I guess that this is a particularly difficult skill to train, because how do you pause on something that has been spoken? Something that you speak is not on a piece of paper, is not on a board, is not drawn to where you can be like, oh, look at this picture of this woman. Let's describe the texture of her hair. Let's describe what other things may be true to her. She has eyeglasses on. She has lenses that are transparent. That means that these are probably prescription glasses. These are not worn for show. Pretty much drawing inferences, but with spoken communication, I guess it boils down to you having good presence and ability to be able to remain present and focused and not be distracted by how the speech makes you feel. Is it making you feel bored? Is it making you feel insulted? Whatever those feelings are, let them go and don't let those serve as a distraction. Another thing that I can mention is when I was in school, sometimes people would be distracted by the dumbest of things. Somebody walking down the hallway, somebody dropping a pencil, and you're looking at what fell to the ground, even though you should know what a pencil dropping to the ground sounds like. Little things like that. Why is it that if us speaking is probably our primary form of contact, how come we're not investing more time into training and developing proper ways to listen, but also you as the speaker, proper ways to deliver your thoughts? And I promise you that as I keep going, it's going to get better. In my life, I have experienced pretty much all sorts of conversations. I have had serious ones, lighthearted ones, funny ones, encouraging ones, critical ones, analytical ones, debates, heated arguments, criticisms, disagreements, agreements, fights, the making of plans, coordination of events. You guys know me. The entirety of this channel proves what I'm getting ready to say. I invest a decent amount of time processing events like that, processing interactions. Through my processing of those incidents, and given the frequency and depth which I approach them and perform, that ought to indicate to you how conversations that went particularly sour are instances that I took the time to be able to reflect and grow from. But with some people, instances like that, they could have benefited from an analytical type of approach, an analytical conversation course in school so that they could be prepared to identify in their real life as adults when they are experiencing that. And the reason I say that is because I have been told very often that I have manipulative tendencies and that I can even be, to an extent, someone who tends to attack people or criticize people. And I say, it is incredibly disappointing for me that you look at it that way from the get-go, because you ought to know that I initiated this conversation just as if I would initiate the reading of a book that I am attempting to genuinely comprehend, given that I'm going to invest my time in it. And I think that because I like to be an analytical and critical reader, that's why I no longer read outside of school, because I just don't have a realistic way to have the time to be able to read something, to absorb it to the extent that I like to. Being in school gave me the time to be able to practice that. But now, as an adult, I practice the breaking down of a book, except that as opposed to analyzing books, I am analyzing people, actual people, not authors, not books that authors put out. I'm going straight to the person, because the person is the source material. I am not digesting something that an author had time to stitch together, put together, build, organize, structure, think about. I am analyzing things that people said on the fly. Because I am analyzing things that people said on the fly, I know that the final version of what I just heard in a conversation is not there yet. A conversation, I think, should be addressed in three parts, three components. And this is why, personally, I don't have time for superficial conversations, let alone having a huge circle of people I interact with, because I like to approach a conversation with a little bit of a preamble. This preamble would take the place of what skimming a book would be. When you're getting ready to read something and you're going to do an analytical kind of approach with it, you will want to skim it so that you can get a general idea of what you're getting ready to consume, what you're getting ready to process, what you're getting ready to learn about. But in a conversation, that really doesn't happen, because who out there goes up to a person and tells them, hey, so today's conversation is going to be an intro. It's going to be about giving you an idea of what this topic is going to entail, be about, the direction it's headed for, and this is going to consist of 3 parts. No, this kind of has to happen on the fly. I would expect that you, as someone who is addressing me, and you have knowledge of how it is that I like to carry out conversations, that this would be something that you inherently do. You already understand how it is that I manifest in a conversation. Therefore, you know that conversations with me will be long and will be deep. If you're not someone in that default mindset, that's why I don't bother to entertain you, because you and I are not going to get along. You will have the tendency of being someone who, as soon as I start to get analytical and critical, you may take offense to what I say, and that is not the intent. In the same manner that you learn to read and eventually you start writing, and you have your writing criticized by peers, how you speak, your speeches, your spoken books ought to be analyzed and criticized by peers. Or I guess what I'm trying to say with criticism is possibly critiqued. Understand the importance of having a moment to be fleshed out like that, to be pulled apart like that. Because what you say to me, I may grasp in a certain way. What you say to somebody else, it could be the same topic, but somehow somebody else may have a way to interpret something that you are saying ever so slightly differently, and that ever so slightly can make a huge difference. So the way I look at this is the ability for you to understand a conversation is just as complex as whatever process takes place when you're reading something. To comprehend the conversation requires just as much skill as comprehending reading material. All in all, what I'm going to address here more in depth is going to be how I believe that there is a form of conversational illiteracy. I don't know what to call conversation illiteracy. I'm pretty sure that there's a specific word for when you speak to someone and they legit do not understand what you're saying, just like being illiterate means the inability to read or write. There has to be a term for the inability to comprehend spoken words, but immediately off the top of my head, I cannot think of what that word is. The basics. You know the words. I'm not using a very difficult vocabulary, but when it comes to the analytical aspect, that's the part that needs work. That's the part that's struggling. What I'm getting to is defining the character trait of the people who you may have had a conversation that ended up being unpleasant when it shouldn't have. And in my honest opinion, defensive conversations, like when you're talking to someone who feels compelled to defend themselves, I look at it as they lack the skill of communicating productively, receiving information in a healthy way, receiving information regardless of context, whether it is a compliment, criticism, no matter what it is. If someone tends to take a defensive approach when a conversation gets serious and critical and analytical, I think that that is a clear example of someone demonstrating a lack of skill at spoken comprehension, listening comprehension. And maybe the reason a person may take that stance is because when you are reading a book, you don't have the opportunity to face the author. You are receiving the author's message at your own time when the author is not there. And in some cases, you don't even ever meet the author. However, with someone you speak to, you're interacting with them in real time. Therefore, you have an opportunity to actually react as you go to the content being delivered to you. You can listen to someone, but not think about it. When you're reading, especially this preliminary stage of reading, when you're supposed to be skimming to get a general idea of what a topic is going to be, you tend to miss out on that stage, precious stage, when you're having a conversation with someone, because you don't get to skim ahead at what this person is going to say. Your mood is pretty much establishing itself as the person speaks. I like pre-conversations. Pre-conversations is something like, let's say that I have to talk to you about how I arrived at the conclusion that I'm going to, I don't know, quit the channel. I could start you guys off with something like, so lately I have been finding it very overwhelming to manage the channel, and I'm really not sure that this is the perfect path for me, or that I can continue to do this quite like I have at this point. Boom. That's the intro. Then to add you slightly more details, I can say things like, well, I don't have time. I don't get to work out anymore. I don't get to eat anymore. I'm not spending enough time with family because in its place, I'm doing this. Boom, that's it. Now, eventually, when you do sit down to actually critically read me out with the rest of my content when it comes to that specific topic, that's when you get to be like, well, Zam, maybe what you're having is problems with time management. Maybe you're moving too slow with certain things. Maybe you're postponing things that you could be taking care of as soon as you arrive home. Something like that. It could be anything, any number of things. But pretty much the pre-conversation should serve as the overview, and not at all intended to be in depth. You can begin to awaken your deeper thoughts with this introduction, but your deeper thoughts ought to develop as you receive the rest of the content. Probably during the second round of the conversation. After the pre-conversation, that's when you start to add a little bit of depth to it. The reason I say it like that, the introductory aspect of a conversation, the skimming aspect of a conversation, and I hope this makes sense, it's because I feel like that's where people, especially people who get offended easily and are in a continuous state of being defensive, you are stuck in the pre-conversation stage. You are stuck in the skimming stage of the matter, as opposed to beginning to analytically process it. And the reason I say this is because sometimes I may go back to a topic with a person to finally start adding an extra layer of depth, and I discover that this person is beginning to think about the matter that I had brought up in the first round of the conversation. Because remember, I'm the one establishing the topic. I'm the one being the book. I'm the one being the speaker. So once I give you that intro, I expect that it at least got you to think, and that you're going to, especially if it's a serious topic, a serious conversation, that you're going to take great pride in beginning to process it. Now, that part I will also get to in a little bit, because it is possible for you to hit a wall. And that is something that you got to learn to recognize and break from it immediately or as soon as possible. So with that said, can you guys begin to see and understand what I mean when I say that we have reading skills, but we don't have conversational skills that are being worked on? Nowadays, anytime I'm going to go over something with someone who may be challenging for me to deal with, because that thing that I say on the channel pretty often, superficial people, I'm starting to alter my approach a little bit. What I'm starting to do is I am beginning to segment the conversation. And that's where I got the idea of, you know what? This needs to be treated like it's a book. A speaker needs to be looked at as a book that is automatically scrolling, and you have to be able to keep up with the speed of scrolling, the rate of scrolling. Otherwise, you'll miss out on the content. And the whole point of segmenting the conversation would be to, of course, allow for the person to have this skimming processing time to prepare to dive into the matter. Me as the speaker, it could give me the time to put together evidence to illustrate a point without the risk of the defensive person starting to interrupt. Do you ever talk to someone who is so constantly on defense mode, even though your intent is not to attack, but that is the state that they're just in perpetually? When it comes to that, I think that I want to blame the way that we receive some of our content nowadays. To give an example, the rise of people online producing spoken content that has a lot to do with them sharing a story of them defending themselves from something. Big YouTubers, for example, they have to defend themselves from allegations that they are doing whatever it is that they're doing. And in other instances, the stories of how police treats certain members of the community. We're continuously hearing stories of how these people need to be defended and how these people are defending themselves from certain things. So in a sense, nobody who's producing the content is for a second considering what the state of your audience may be as they listen to you. If you are telling a story in which you are defending yourself from something, that automatically predisposes the audience to be in defense mode along with you. Or you might have the side of the audience that may be listening to you because they are already convinced that you're guilty of something, and therefore they have a more prosecutor approach, which is, I don't care what you say, I am going to focus on finding the ways that I can prove you wrong, that I can take whatever you're saying and be like, actually, this is how in the past you have contradicted yourself, and this is the point to completely annihilate your current defense, blah, blah, blah. So in a sense, we are, again, lingering on the surface, dismissing any possibility of depth, and we are losing that skill, but we're not realizing that we're losing that skill. So for instance, to prepare for a conversation nowadays in the present, I may supply the idea of the conversation, but I may postpone it until somehow in my gut I just sense that a particular segment, because remember, I'm segmenting conversations now, that a particular segment is clear to me as the person who's going to deliver the content of that segment. It's clear to me so that I can deliver it in a way that I can help the other person understand it. I have to understand my own content before I deliver it if I have any hope of my whatever I'm trying to get across to get across. Something may sound like a contradiction, but you got to consider that in this preliminary stage of a conversation, that contradiction may end up being clarified in the future. And me personally, in my experiences dealing with that person who's defensive and easy to offend, as soon as they hear something that may resemble a contradiction, boom, they go apeshit. They just lose their minds and they enter that defense mode. Even though you're like, my intention is not to attack you at all. I'm trying to understand you. In the same manner that you invest the time reading something to comprehend it, why would you not spend the time listening to someone to understand them? See what I mean? That is the whole point. Some people, unfortunately, when you're verbally speaking to them, again, you cannot control the environment. You cannot control who walks by if it's a public setting that may distract this person. Some noise may distract a person, anything. Some people just cannot remain engaged when they're being spoken to. Me personally, I don't have that problem. Some people in the comment section of videos, they have said, I wish this narrator wasn't so boring. I wish this narrator had a better voice. Or when I see positive comments being left, they say, oh, I really like how this person narrates because they throw in their own little joke. Or they have a picture or a meme attached to what they're saying, and that made it funny to me, so it's easy to remember and understand. I don't have an issue with that. I have an issue with the fact that you are not flexible. You have to be catered to in a specific way, otherwise you get lost. I can say that I can adapt to any setting as an audience member. If it's a serious speech, I can remain engaged. If it's a serious TV show, I can remain engaged. If it's a comedic one, I can remain engaged. If it's an educational one, a coaching one, a colorful one, anything, I don't have an issue with that. But some people, the only way to get to them is if you're speaking to them in their language. And usually it tends to be a superficial one. But anything that's critical, anything that's analytical, people for some reason find it boring. And I just wish that people looked at any interaction like that, any encounter, as what can I learn from this? It is important for the speaker to define where the point is heading to and for it to be presented as structured as possible. I'm not going to deny that. The speaker has a responsibility to, at the very least, be clear and be consistent. After knowing where the conversation is heading, critical talking can commence. The problem with defensive people is that they don't process it. Again, this is the part where I'm going to start repeating myself from time to time. The preamble, the pre-conversation, the skimming element of the conversation. If the defensive person did not take the time to process that preliminary conversation, they missed out on that crucial stage. And when that crucial stage is missed, that is when anything that you begin to say, when it's time to do the critical speaking, the analytical speaking, that's when they tend to resort to having an offended attitude. And what's sad about this is that when it comes to the criticism, or really any content, any spoken content, written content, or whatever, agreeing or disagreeing with something does not make it right or wrong. Here on the channel, I hope that you guys are never under the impression that anytime I may present something that sounds factual, like say, oh, wear a mask so that you never get sick. I would hope that you look at it as, well, Zam, I have worn masks and I get sick. Therefore, that's not entirely true. Yes, my statement is not true, but at least try to find out what aspect of my statement might be true. Just because you disagree with it, because you as a mask wearer still get sick, it doesn't make it right, because I as a mask wearer can say that I have not gotten sick ever since I wear the mask. Now you and I need to find out analytically and critically what it is that we do different that might make it the case. Why is it that I haven't gotten sick, but you have gotten sick? Maybe you touch your face. Maybe you're not wearing your mask appropriately. Or maybe your mask got contaminated and you didn't realize it. Or maybe in a setting at a time when you should have been wearing it, you didn't wear it, and it just caught up with you. It can be any number of things. Or maybe your mask was in a rainy environment and therefore, since it's wet, it lost its powers. That is the critical part. That is the analytical part. But sometimes when you deal with the defensive person does not give you the opportunity to express yourself to where they would realize that you may end up defending them. You may end up siding with them, but they didn't give you the chance to get there because they do not have the resilience or the patience to let you have the floor, the stage for you to open and express yourself, because instead they want to interject immediately. I think that is wrong. Now, just because I'm saying that's wrong, it doesn't mean that what I'm saying is right, because you guys may have a very powerful reason to be like, Zam, interjecting is important and this is why. In the same manner that I can say interjecting is stupid because more than likely I'm getting ready to go over what you're saying. It's not your turn yet. Hear me out fully. And then if I did not mention what you intended to express, then you can present what you wanted to interject with. But at the same time, I understand why people would want to interject because, again, when something is spoken, there is no way to reference it back. You are not taking notes as you go. And therefore, the person who interjects, they are going to be the ones to possibly forget. Maybe, we need to consider approaching conversations as if you were reading something to analyze it critically later. Maybe it's time we started taking notes when conversations are taking place. And now, to summarize the entirety of what I'm trying to convey here, is that ideally, what you just heard from somebody will inspire you to continue to seek out information as opposed to hitting a wall, the wall that I mentioned earlier, and remaining trapped in there. It's like one wall erected and another wall erected and another one and another one. Next thing you know, you're trapped inside a box. Walls just built up around you, and maybe you are aware that you ran into a wall, but what are you doing to get yourself out of that? Are you residing within those walls, or are you on your way to climb out of those walls? Or are you building a door to exit that room? Ideally, you would resort to various sources and not just the ones that validate your opinion. Find out why others may also disagree. Find out why others may also agree. So for me, I have found great relief, and one of the confident boosts that I get here on the channel is when people say that they found my topic at the very least interesting and thought-provoking. And the reason, to me, that's one of the best compliments I can possibly ever get in my life is because it goes to show that it is possible for you to get through what I'm saying and not be offended. So for the people who get offended and stay offended because your way of interacting is not compatible with my style of interacting, just know that it's possible for it to be a good experience, a positive experience. You have to work on yourself to make that be that case. My goal, my hope, my desire, a selfish one perhaps, is that everything that I say, all of my talking, all of those points that I presented, all those instances will provoke in you extra curiosity, or perhaps all that criticism, that information, all those questions that I tend to ask. When you do that, when you take the time to actually absorb me, even if it takes me 2 hours to get something expressed, to get something across, take all of those points, instances, extra curiosity, criticism, information, questions, that, in my opinion, is what breeds knowledge. Every time you are getting ready to learn something from a book, all of those things come together, and that is what helps you learn something from that source material. A person talking to you is no different. All of those things, all of those points, all of those questions, all of those criticisms, that knowledge is bred, and after that knowledge is born, that knowledge will breed understanding. Understanding will breed genuine bond, which in turn could also breed intimacy or improve intimacy. And by intimacy, I mean, you know how people understandably have walls built up. You have boundaries that you don't allow for people to access. Well, to bond with me, criticizing me, is a great way to do so, because I'm always, always, always looking for ways to improve myself, my environment, my surroundings, and even the people around me. But nowadays, we have an attitude of, you cannot be criticizing people, let people just be. But what if the way people just are is hurtful, is damaging? You ever go around and you deal with someone who does not know you, but yet their approach is instantly that they feel like they're a victim of something. They're a victim of a scam. They're a victim of a conspiracy of some sort. And I'm like, well, if you're the victim of that, how come I cannot say that I'm the victim of that as well? What makes your case, your story, your circumstance special and mine isn't? All in all, it's a skill that we are losing. It's a skill that I believe we all should have. And most importantly to me, the ability to comprehend someone speaking to you is a skill that we all obviously can have. In the age of fast information and poor attention span, which leads to poor retention, we are being alienated from it. We are being alienated from such a skill. All we do is superficially listen to and read about a plethora of ideas, a plethora of items, a plethora of just material content topics, but we are not necessarily taking the time to really get to specialize at any of them. If you guys ever left me a link to a movie and I never came back to you to tell you something about it, it's because I have not had the time to prepare myself to dive into that content. And nowadays, I felt great relief when I discussed Star Wars with someone, and I'm like, is it bad that I don't have comprehension, like Star Wars comprehension about its content presently, like in 2023? And someone told me, no, Zam, it's not you, it's just bad writing. And then I thought, okay, I think I can finally understand what it means for a show to be written badly. I wasn't able to learn anything. When I tried to recap it, it's like, what the hell did I just watch? What actually happened here? And I cannot say with substance what happened. That is how I know that something was poorly written. And it didn't dawn on me until I started watching the latest seasons of Star Wars shows. And I thought, wow, I can understand now the differences between how the older stuff delivered better content than the newer stuff. Now, this isn't to denigrate online information. You can still learn stuff. It's not optimal for depth, though. That's all I'm saying. Even content that you listen to that's just video essays, my favorite ones have to do with aviation. Just because I'm listening to this video about a crash, it doesn't mean that it's able to go over all of the nuances that led up to that accident. Some people only like to mention just the immediate things, and it's only like a 7-minute long video. But you really think a 7-minute video can encompass what something like the NTSB had to do like a 300-page report on? Think it through. And I guess the best thing I can insert in there to validate the point is doom scrolling. It's okay for you to get curious about something like, oh, I have a cat. What is it that makes cats cool? Oh, since when did people start having cats? Since when did people begin to understand cats? What have cats done to improve people's lives? You can keep going and going and going and going deep down the rabbit hole, but are you actually learning about cats with substance? A lot of folks just absorb the superficial information they get from someone online or in person, but never really take deeper dives after that. Like, if you had a conversation with me and it impacted you in any way, just take the time to process it further. Dive into it deeper. Even if it's a depressing conversation, if it's a negative one, whatever it is, become a curious creature. But a lot of people, in an effort to avoid negativity, avoid bad vibes, avoid bad energy, Y'all are skipping out on what could be the most beautiful aspect of existing with someone, of bonding with someone. Me personally, I live in a state of permanently going in depth with things. Why? That is my natural impulse. Any of you who have had the privilege of conversing with me in written form, but even in spoken form directly, you will see that. You will see that the way that I write sounds exactly like the way that I speak, and vice versa. And I do that on purpose. I am going to ask questions. If you open the door to me asking questions, you better be prepared and you better be willing to go deep, because if you give me a little ass answer that doesn't clarify things in my brain, in my curious brain, then I'm going to start prying. And if you're not into that, then stop wasting my time and attempting to talk to me. I'm not interested in you, because the way I interpret you is you're not interested in me. If you're not asking me questions, if you're not talking to me about me, I see it as, oh, okay, I'm wasting my time with this clown. I'm telling them things and they're just not taking the time to process it deeper. Every single conversation you ever have with me has the potential of you revisiting it. If you never revisit conversations with me, that tells me that you either don't care or are absent or are painfully superficial. I will always criticize that, because that doesn't work for me. In the same manner that you have things that work for you, I have things that will not work for me. With all that said, now I have to say that some people, however, do not take that very well, despite me demonstrating that my intentions are good. That is evidence in my book, again, I'm going to repeat myself, of you hitting a wall. And that wall that you hit, to me, indicates that it's an example of how you could have benefited from being more depth oriented. But unfortunately, it doesn't appear that that's a skill that you have. Maybe you do have the capacity to think in depth, but if you would rather not do it because of how it leaves you feeling, then to me, that is something that you might need guidance with. You may legit need a coach to think through these things. And to me, that shouldn't be a cause for you to feel frustrated. It should be something you see as an opportunity to better yourself. And the reason I say that is because to me, that would be the way to prevent misunderstandings, which lead to the fights and the awful experiences talking to someone. I also think that leads to you not being able to specialize on your connections. Ultimately, you wouldn't know how to define them. You won't be able to guess what someone would want when they're absent. For me, if someone knows me well, if someone has truly been invested with me, they should know what kinds of decisions to make in my absence. They would know what things I would approve of, what ingredients could go in my food, what color scheme I would react favorably to. It can be as superficial as that, or as deep as, you know what, I'm not going to bring Zam something from this place because she does not believe in supporting a place that does A, B, C, and D. So to put it bluntly, you cannot make educated guesses if you have not been educating yourself on the person you are attempting to guess for or make guesses for. Exercise taking mental notes. Just like I mentioned moments ago about how the problem is that you don't take handwritten notes, train yourself to make mental notes somehow. Since spoken sources are harder to revisit, we don't normally take notes when we are conversing. So I think that if you have the susceptibility of forgetting something, that's when you would take the responsibility of remembering something. Use a tool to aid your memory, and that way, if there is something that you were critically thinking about that you wish to revisit, you can ask questions. Conversing with people verbally is our primary source of communication, bonding, talking. And that is, the way I see it, spoken literature. The stages of speaking need to be studied more. Maybe it's been so long since we were in school that we stopped thinking with structure. And that's why our conversations daily, because they tend to be so informal, that's not exercising your brain. And that's when you end up inadvertently taking a more defensive stance. That ought to help you avoid pitfalls. Learn to recognize when you collapse, when you fall into a pit. Most of our critical conversations happen verbally. Therefore, it's only natural that a spoken conversation is something that you would want to continuously improve. In the same manner that I think you need to be willing to be the recipient of a critical speech yourself. So in this case, after all the trash that I just shared right now, you guys ought to be able to put to the test and prove that you can come back to me and you yourself have a speech of your own that I can skim through, be analytical and critical toward, and then take it from there. And that's why some of you guys, I have to leave your comments sitting there for a while, because I know that some of you will leave me comments that are very deep. And I want to be able to come back to you and give you an equally deep or even deeper reply. I think that is the greatest show of honor and respect that I can provide you guys at this time. In conclusion, ideally, you will reciprocate the conversational effort. Be as present, mindful, thoughtful, curious, analytical, and critical as you want to be, as you can. See what your own mind can do. Maybe you don't exercise like this often, but in the end, the most important thing is to never, ever, ever lose respect for the person you're addressing or for the person that you're receiving information from. Never lose the respect, never lose the love. Remember who they are. And in my case, if you're talking to me like that, remember, if I let you talk to me at all, it's a big privilege. More than likely, you can bet 100% that I am on your team. Even if we're disagreeing, even if we're struggling, even if we're having a problem, more than likely, I'm still on your team. We are just at a descent, but you won't necessarily lose me. The only way you'll lose me is if you disrespect, treat me with very little love and dignity, and legitimately, with ill intent, attack me. If that's what you're doing, if that's what you're going to represent in my life, don't waste my time. Leave. Well, that's it, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I know this was a long one. I hope that I was able to make sense during all of this. And like always, the floor is open. It's yours. You can take the stage. Give me feedback. Let me know your feelings. And I'll catch you whenever I can.